All right, joining us now, independent Senator Angus King of Maine. He's a member of the Intelligence and the Armed Services Committees, and there's a lot to talk with the senator about today.
Yeah, Senator, a lot I want to get to. First, I want to start, though, because you're an independent. Of course, you caucus with the Democrats, but you come from a state that's split. You had a couple of districts, one Republican, one Democratic. Jump in on the conversation, if you will, on these people that don't want Trump or Biden to run, but they overwhelmingly, when they have to break, they break Biden's way. Are you seeing an exhaustion in some of the more pro-Trump areas of the state of Maine, or do you think he's still just as strong as he was in 2016?
Well, first I want to offer a little therapy to you guys with regard to the Red Sox. I mean, I can't resist that. Just know that somewhere in the universe, it's 2004, and Dave Roberts is about to steal second. Just
Willie, did you
get
that? Willie, did you get that?
Just hold on to that thought.
So good right now.
Yeah, it'll just help you through this difficult period. Yeah, you'll get my bill.
Willie, is that helping you out right now?
I just canceled my summer trip to Bar Harbor. How's that?
Oh, man. Oh, my God.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Senator, let's try that again. So, what are you picking up as far as independent? Because we talk about every day, independent swing voters, and I always talk about in the suburbs of Atlanta, man, they've broken hard against Donald Trump. The suburbs of Philly, they're never going back to Donald Trump. I'm curious if you're seeing it even in states like Maine that had some pretty pro-Trump areas.
Well, I haven't seen any polling. I got to tell you, my wife and I do an RV trip every fall through rural Maine, particularly northern Maine, and boy, in 16 and 20, you sure did see a lot of Trump signs, and a real political symbol is homemade signs. When you see homemade signs in front of people's houses, that tells you something. So I don't really have a feel for that, Joe. I do think that Donald Trump's base has shrunk. How much, it's really hard to tell, but that Wall Street Journal poll is pretty strong stuff.
Yeah, talk to me about you and you're working with Lisa Murkowski, another independent who caucuses with Republicans, about requiring the Supreme Court. This makes sense to me. The Supreme Court to create a code of conduct. I understand about the separations of power, but at the same time, Congress certainly has a say in this. Well, constitutionally.
Lisa and I's bill is really simple. It's 3 pages long, and it doesn't prescribe what the code of conduct should be. It just says you should adopt one, make it public, put it on your website, and then tell us how it's being followed and enforced within the court. This is not a radical idea. Every judge in the country, except for these 9, have to follow a code of conduct. Every judge in Maine, went back and read the canons. Every federal judge except the Supreme Court. And to me, it's sort of sad that we're even having this discussion. And listen, I'm doing this because I'm an institutionalist. I hate to see the Supreme Court wounding itself. And that's what it's doing right now. It's at the approval rating of the Supreme Court is at the lowest level, I think, in history. And I don't understand why Justice Roberts isn't saying, yeah, this is something we should do just to reassure the public. It doesn't make any sense to me.
So, Senator, as you said, Chief Justice Roberts has declined to appear at this ethics hearing in the Senate. If he were to sit before you, though, what do you think are the important questions that he should answer, that Clarence Thomas should answer for that matter?
Well, I agree with the Chief Justice. I'm reluctant to say that the Chief Justice should come and appear before a congressional committee. That's only happened once or twice in American history. I do think that there are issues of separation of power. On the other hand, he wrote this long lawyerly letter with 3 pages of, and it was, to me, the key phrase was, we'll follow the substance of the rules. No, it should be, we'll follow the rules. And here's what they are. And they could have easily said, he could have easily said, yes, we're going to adopt a code of ethics, or they don't even have to do much drafting. They could do it in a weekend. All they got to do is take the existing canon of ethics for federal judges and apply it to themselves about disclosure. Here's the key phrase, though. And I remember learning this many years ago. The key phrase for judges is that judges should avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety. Why is that so important? Because the courts don't have police force, they don't have armies. They rest upon their moral authority by the trust that people put in them as an institution, and that's what's declining. And that's why I can't imagine that Justice Roberts wants his legacy to be a catastrophic decline in public support and the concept of the support for the United States Supreme Court. And that's why this ought to be easy.
Senator King, we want to turn to the debt ceiling. The House Republicans finally passed their budget this week. We know the president has released his. Those two sides, though, aren't talking. No negotiations yet, and the clock is obviously ticking. There's some estimates that the country may hit that ceiling by June, which is just 5 or 6 weeks away. The Senate has not acted yet. What role can your chamber step in here to try to bridge this divide?
Well, the first thing I want to say is how deeply touched I am by the concern of the House Republicans for the debt and the deficit. It's really moving, particularly because they raised the debt ceiling 3 times without much of a peep during the Trump administration. And I'll bet you if you go back and look at the record, pretty much everyone that was there then voted for the Trump tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations that put a $2 trillion add-on to the deficit. So, this is sort of new religion here. The other piece that bothered me, I saw a quote yesterday. One of their leaders said, "We're not going to give Joe Biden a blank check." Now, that betrays either a gross misunderstanding of what this is all about or a deliberate effort to mislead people. This isn't a check for future spending. This is paying our bills. That's what this is all about. It's like you get your credit card bill at the end of the month and you say, well, I'm going to square up my finances by not paying this bill. These are for expenses that have already been incurred. And so that's what's really frustrating about this. The bill obviously isn't going to go anywhere in the Senate. And here's something really interesting that I learned digging into this. They're big on, rolling back expenditures. They say no defense cuts, no Social Security, no Medicare. That's fine. But that means a 20+% cut in everything else. If you look at federal discretionary spending today and go back to 2010, today it is below the 2010 level when you adjust for inflation. I find that really amazing. In other words, we're pretty much in line with where the country was 15 or 20 years ago. The other thing about what they proposed is there weren't any details. And when you talk about a 20% cut in domestic spending, where is that going to occur? Is it border guards? Is it air traffic controllers? Is it veterans health care? Is it teachers? All of those things, they have to necessarily be on the table. So it's disingenuous to say generally we're going to make this cut and figure out later where the cut comes. It's not going to go anywhere in the Senate. The discussion should be around the budget. That's where you debate priorities and spending levels. Don't use the full faith and credit of the U.S. and threaten to take us into a financial catastrophe to try to lever something you ought to be arguing about when we get to the budget. I worry, to be honest with you, that some of these people either don't know what the catastrophe will look like or they're okay with it, and then they're going to blame it on Joe Biden.
So, Senator, I just want to go back to the legislation that you're hoping to introduce requiring Supreme Court justices to have this code of conduct. I mean, the point is, right, that these judges are not to be exposed. They're supposed to keep their objectivity clean, really, and not have it impacted by the lure of money and gifts and favors. And if you look at Clarence Thomas and then you add in, and I know this, is an extra, but his wife and her text messages to Mark Meadows, I mean, there are some serious concerns about this Supreme Court justice taking gifts that are in the value of hundreds of thousands of dollars and houses and a lifestyle really created by a Republican donor. And I just wonder if this legislation goes through, if you can meet your goal here. Can it retroactively apply to Clarence Thomas so that questions can be asked and answered?
Well, I do think there does need to be more disclosure, and it's a shame that a ProPublica, a journalistic organization, had to dig out matters that should have been disclosed. I don't see this as retroactive. It's not aimed at Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas's activities certainly have told us why we need to do this, but it's really forward-looking. And again, the Supreme Court has enormous power, and they're there for life. And there have to be some checks, and the check here is transparency. The ancient question of political science is quis custodes ipso custodiet. Who will guard the guardians? And in this case, nobody's guarding the guardians. All we're saying is put something out there that the public can see that you're going to abide by, and a mechanism so that the public can see whether you are abiding by it. We're not imposing rules. We're saying adopt your own rules. And, you know, Justice Roberts writes this long, lawyerly piece, and I finished reading it, and methinks he doth protest too much. Why are they resisting this?
It's interesting. Senator Angus King of Maine, thank you very much for being on this morning. We appreciate. Thank you for the therapy for Joe. We appreciate it.
Always here to help.
All